Beep, 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 beep. Check, 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 check. Hey, guys. Hey, hey. Happy Monday. This is Hot Ham Radio here. I didn't keep up with any of the Idaho news this weekend. And there's a bunch of weird stuff that I found this morning. Beep, 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 beep. You might be able to hear the kid upstairs. Sorry. Um, So, yeah, I woke up this morning to this little butte because would you believe it? The New York Times chimed in. It's about time that the Times chimed in. That's what I say. Why not? Let's join the ranks of all the respected journalists out there like Dateline who are reporting complete crap um all over the world. So, yeah, I don't know if y'all have read this, but I have only read snippets, so I would like to read the whole thing right now. This is the New York Times. Came out 2 days ago, I suppose. Okay, that's an interesting photo. I haven't seen that one before. Investigators at the rented house in Moscow, Idaho, where, yeah. Boy, that house is in bad shape. Yeah. Inside the hunt for the Idaho killer. After 4 students were stabbed to death in a house near a college campus, investigators scooped up data and forensic evidence, hoping for leads. A new DNA technique finally brought a breakthrough. All right, let's hear this, shall we? Again, you might have already read this, but I haven't in its entirety, and it seems pretty wild from what I'm seeing. And especially after Friday, with the gag order being upheld, for now at least, I just think it's interesting. So this is, again, it came out on Friday. This is by Mike Baker, reporting from Moscow. Mike Baker. He's probably a great journalist. I don't know. Let's see, shall we? In the weeks after 4 University of Idaho students were found slaughtered in a house near campus last November, a growing roster of investigators desperately searched for answers and had to identify a suspect or even find the murder weapon. Do you think this was written? I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt this a lot with my own weird commentary because do you think I'm wondering if this was written for people who've been following the case or for people who haven't even heard about the case? What do you think? Okay. Publicly, the authorities were assuring worried residents in the small college town that they were making progress. Privately, they were exhausting their prospects, scouring through the backgrounds of those with the thinnest possible connections to the case. Through the first 2 weeks of December, investigators put some of their focus on classmates of the victims. They also widened the search to examine a man in another state who had been known to send harassing messages to women but had visited Idaho only twice in his life. Who was this? They looked at a woman previously charged with assaults in the region. Okay. They looked at a man once accused of wielding a knife. I think we know who that is. They looked at sex offenders. They looked at a white supremacist. Each turned out to be a dead end. What? Where are they? How do they know this? Interesting. Hi, Susan. Welcome to Story Time. It's story time here on Hot Ham Radio. Then, after spending weeks sifting through an array of evidence that seemed to lead nowhere, investigators announced an arrest in late December on the other side of the country. Brian Koberger, a PhD student from a nearby university. He was identified only after investigators turned to an advanced method of DNA analysis that had rarely been used in active murder investigations. Sorry about that ad. Thanks, New York Times, for the ads. Gotta have them, I guess. The story of how dozens of officers from local, state, and federal agencies took the quadruple murder investigation into extraordinary territory is only now becoming more apparent through recently obtained records and interviews with people familiar with the investigation. Wow, I haven't. Oh, where have I heard that? Oh, yeah. Every news source. Sorry, I'm getting a little worked up. My moon head's big. I'm going to shrink him a little bit. There we go. Okay. People familiar with the investigation who discussed key details that emerged before the issuance of a gag order in the case. The case has shown the degree to which law enforcement investigators have come to rely on the digital footprints that ordinary Americans leave in nearly every facet of their lives. Okay, this is me talking now. My personal feeling about this case and watching it unfold and like following all the press releases back from when it happened, seems like they were relying on digital footprints pretty much solely. I could be wrong. Continuing. Online shopping, car sales, carrying a cell phone, drives along city streets, and amateur genealogy all played roles in an investigation that was solved in the end as much through technology as traditional sleuthing. Are you freaking kidding me? An investigation that was solved. Okay, I guess we can say that now. Okay. Moment of silence at the vigil photo. Now indicted on 4 counts of murder, Mr. Koberger has declined to enter a plea, but contended previously through his lawyer that he would be exonerated. That was through his Pennsylvania lawyer, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Investigators have yet to detail a possible motive. To this day, family members of the victims remain unaware of any prior connections that the accused killer had with the 4 young people who were killed. Yeah, that's what I thought. The process of identifying and arresting a suspect took over 6 weeks. Weeks of increasing frustration and painstaking examination of evidence as the community pushed for answers. The first 911 call came in around noon, some 7 hours after the murders. Madison Mogan, 21, Kaylee Gonsalves, 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and Ethan Chapin, 20, had been stabbed to death overnight in their bedrooms. Initially, the Moscow Police Department described the attack as targeted and assured residents that there was no risk to the public, but with no indication of who had committed the attack or why, the authorities eventually backtracked. I'm sorry, I don't believe that's true, is it? I remember the lead prosecutor said something about it not necessarily being targeted, but I believe that they backtracked on what he said. I could be wrong. Am I right? Hey, Lisa. Good to see you. I'm just reading this stunning New York Times article. Apparently, the Moscow Police Department initially described the attack as targeted, but once they realized, they didn't know why, the authorities backtracked. Can someone tell me when that was? I'd love to know. We cannot say that there is no threat to the community, the police chief James Fry said at a news conference on November 16th, 3 days after the killings. Okay. The department, which had only a few dozen officers, enlisted the Idaho State Police and the FBI to help, bringing in dozens of additional investigators. Forensic teams processed evidence from the bedrooms, snapped photos around the home's back door, and hunted for footprints. Others searched for surveillance video from around town. A week after the killings, records show, investigators were on the lookout for a certain type of vehicle. Nissan Sentras from the model years 2019 to 2023. This was a week after the killings. Quietly, they ran down details on thousands. Quietly, they ran down details on. I'm sorry, I had to read that a few times. On thousands of such vehicles, including the owner's addresses, license plate numbers, and the color of each sedan. I've never heard this before. Like, what the hell? What the hell? Where are they getting this? Who is telling them this? This is a picture of James Fry. But further scrutiny of the video footage produced more clarity, and on November 25th, the police in Moscow asked law enforcement agencies to look for a different type of car with a similar shape. White Hyundai Elantras from the model years 2011 to 2013. Guess what year Brian Koberger's Elantra is? 2015. Just across the state border at Washington State University, campus police officers began looking through their records for Elantras registered there. Among those they found was one registered to Mr. Koberger, who had moved to the area earlier in 2022 to pursue a PhD in criminology. They checked Mr. Koberger's car more closely, according to a court affidavit. Did they? Wait. Oh, okay. Including visiting the parking lot near his apartment in the early morning hours of November 29th. But what? But the vehicle was a 2015 model, not the earlier models being sought in Moscow. Is the New York Times like helping them out here? What are they doing? Like going, oh, no, don't worry. Here's why all that stuff happened. Here's why everything's inconsistent. Like, you guys, this is so obvious to me. Like, Okay. The next day, records show investigators in Moscow were also looking closely at another vehicle, Miss Gonsalves' car. She had purchased a 2015 Range Rover in the days before her death. Detectives gathered information on the registration, history, and legal owners, clearly interested in the story of who had owned the car. But once again, the information provided few answers. That's interesting. With students at the University of Idaho preparing for final exams, there was a permanent sense of apprehension in the air as people began locking their doors, acquiring pepper spray, and asking on social media how such a brazen killer could remain undetected for so long in a house that had not seen a murder in 7 years. Allegedly. The hunt broadened as investigators vacuumed up more records. Well, good for them. It's the first time I'm hearing about it. They had already sought cell phone data, of course, sought cell phone data. Okay, think about that. What does that mean? Does that mean that they had the phones? Or is this just about pinging? Because they say here they had already sought cell phone data for all phones that pinged cell towers within a half mile of the victim's house from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m., according to search warrant filings. They collected victims' bank records, email correspondence, and social media account data. On December 5th, detectives made a new request for surveillance video seeking all footage recorded on UPS delivery trucks in the days before and after the killings. I've never heard that. The next day, after getting back data on Miss Gonsalves' account on the Tinder dating app, detectives asked for details on 19 specific account holders, including their locations, credit card information, and any private images, pictures, or videos associated with the accounts. The request allowed the inquiry to go much broader than an ordinary search for information, using a single warrant to target 19 different people, said Orrin Kerr, a law professor at the University of California, Berkeley. You couldn't get one warrant to search 19 houses, he said. Investigators were also working with a key piece of evidence, a K-bar knife sheath branded with a U.S. Marine Corps logo that had been found next to two of the victims. They initially began looking for local stores that may have sold the weapon and then fanned out. A request to Amazon sought the order histories of account holders who had purchased such knives. A follow-up request to eBay focused on a series of specific users seeking their purchase histories. Some had connections to the area, including one in Idaho and two in Washington state, while others were from far away, including an account in Japan. Because of redactions, it is unclear if Mr. Koberger's name came up in those records, which is why I don't understand what the hell Dateline was talking about when they were talking about the Amazon order of a knife. They made that up. Or they're stupid. I don't know. The overall data track was growing enormous, demonstrating the extensive breadth of data on consumer platforms that can be made accessible to law enforcement agencies when they are at the stage of hunting for breadcrumbs. You could say this is uncharted territory, Mr. Carr said. They are novel legal questions when there are so many records out there. At the same time, DNA from the scene was being processed. Forensic teams had examined the knife sheath and found DNA that did not belong to any of the inhabitants of the of the house. I'm like reading it. Okay, so at what time? I'm curious about when were they doing that? They ran the sample through the FBI's database, which contains millions of DNA profiles of past criminal offenders, but according to 3 people briefed on the case, they did not get a match. 3 people briefed on the case. At that point, investigators decided to try genetic genealogy, a method that until now has been used primarily to solve cold cases, not active murder investigations. Yeah, that's right, because it's not as specific. Among the growing number of, it's not perfect. I don't know. Among the growing number of genealogy websites that help people trace their ancestors and relatives via their own DNA, some allow users to select an option that permits law enforcement to compare crime scene DNA samples against the website's data. Do you remember that guy that said that Brian Koberger said he had sent in his DNA? A distant cousin who has opted into the system can help investigators building a family tree from crime scene DNA to triangulate and identify a potential perpetrator of a crime. In one of the best-known uses of genealogy in solving a cold case, detectives in 2018 were able to arrest a suspect in a string of rapes and murders years before in California that had been attributed to the so-called Golden State Killer. Yeah, that was crazy. Once a suspect is identified, a direct genetic comparison can be used as confirmation before making an arrest. With few formal regulations, the use of mass genealogy databases has raised concerns about privacy and whether limits should be placed on how the method is used. But authorities across the country say they have found potential in the system to produce leads that are unattainable through traditional investigative efforts. Also, side note, I believe most of these databases ask you if you would like to make your DNA results available to law enforcement. I think you have to have that option. Not sure about all of them. Barbara Ray Venter, a genealogy consultant who worked on the Golden State Killer case, said there was now growing interest in using genealogical DNA not just in cold cases, but also in active crime investigations. That is why the Idaho case is so interesting, she said. To do the genealogical analysis, the Idaho State Police contracted with a private company in Othram in Texas. Othram in Texas, which had a lab able to produce a more extensive DNA profile from the knife sheath than the state lab was set up to examine. Okay. FBI personnel worked with the profile that Othram had produced, according to two people familiar with the investigation, spending days building out a family tree that began with a distant relative. By the morning of December 19th, records show investigators had a name, Brian Koberger. By the morning of December 19th. He had a white Elantra. He was a student at a university 8 miles from the murder scene. Mr. Koberger was already out of town, his semester complete. He had driven home with his father to Pennsylvania, stopped twice by the police along the way for what officers said was tailgating. Just as agents began to scour his background more thoroughly, he had been terminated from his position as a teaching assistant after what was described as altercations with a professor. On December 23rd, investigators sought and received Mr. Koberger's cell phone records. The results added more to their suspicions. His cell phone records. His phone was moving around in the early morning hours of November 13th, but was disconnected from cell networks, perhaps turned off, in the 2 hours around when the killings occurred. Okay. 4 days later, agents in Pennsylvania managed to retrieve some trash from Mr. Koberger's family residence, sending the material to the Idaho State Police Forensic Lab. Checking it against their original DNA profile, the lab was able to reach a game-changing conclusion. The DNA in the trash belonged to a close relative of whoever had left DNA on the knife sheath. Mr. Koberger was arrested on December 30th. We have an individual in custody who committed these horrible crimes, and I do believe our community is safe, the police chief, Mr. Fry, announced. But we still do need to be vigilant, right? Ooh. It's kind of a chilling end. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Isn't that strange? Hang on. No, I'm not one of the lurkers. Don't worry. What do you guys think about that article? It seems actually kind of more realistic to me than the Dateline. But still, I don't understand. It's clearly the prosecution is leaking stuff to the media, but I can't believe that all these other outlets are putting out the craziest stuff. This stuff seems a little more believable to me. I don't know. Susan, you got to listen to the whole damn thing. What? Susan. It's ridiculous. She's too busy watching Trey Ghost. I know her. That's what's going on. I'm going to even play your favorite content. I'm going to play your favorite video, Susan. Let's see if I can figure this out.
As we're all talking about this, and as this goes to court tomorrow, today something very weird happened. Photo kind of out of nowhere from 5 years ago from a magazine called NCC Magazine, Northampton Community College Magazine. 2018 lecture and Q&A with famed author Margaret Atwood. Isn't that a nice picture? except for that whole
Isn't that
business
a
about
nice picture?
the guy who's seated in the front row clutching his copy of The Handmaid's Tale. It's kind of like a sea of women who went to this, predominantly feminist authors lecture.
Women.
And Brian Koberger took a front row seat, smiling, had his picture taken right there beside, right there. You can see it underneath the banner that says Northampton Community College. That's Margaret Atwood standing right there in the middle. It's just all very weird. But he did graduate from that school that year. He got his degree in arts and psychology. And if you have read or if you have seen The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, it's about a futuristic society where women produce children for the ruling class, kind of like slave women. Not good when you are convicted or when you are accused.
I gotta hear that again.
He got his degree in arts and psychology.
Let's hear it, Banfield.
And if you have read or if you have seen The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, it's about a futuristic society where women produce children for the ruling class, kind of like slave women. Not good when you are convicted or when you are accused, years later, 5 years later, of murdering 3 women and a man. I want to bring in Caitlin Becker on this, the senior reporter for thedailymail.com, because I'm still trying to figure out how this all came to being.
Oh, wait for it. This girl is a
did this
wonderful
picture
reporter,
surface?
apparently.
Who took it? Who found it? It's just kind of so random.
Well, Ashley, like you said, it was part of this magazine for the community college where Brian attended and where this, speech and Q&A was held. And like most things, it popped up on Reddit, kind of out of nowhere. I think, people go back through some of their archives and then they suddenly find the connections with something you probably looked at 100 times and never thought was important. But here it is. And there he is in the very front row of, I think, an unexpected place to be. I think a lot of people were surprised when they saw this, that he was there. But there is a part of me that just isn't shocked when I saw this. Everything that I know about Brian Koberger, based on the people that we've spoken to who know him, he is sort of the height of hubris. I think he's a little bit arrogant when it comes to his intelligence. So I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't necessarily agree with Margaret Atwood, if he still would have been sitting front row in that Q&A. And so I think either way, I'm not surprised he's there.
I wonder what that 90-minute Q&A was like, and if he spoke up. We don't know that yet. Nobody's been able to pop out from, that sea of faces there. Nobody's reported out as to whether they remember him speaking. Although because he's one of the only dudes in the audience, it would be memorable for sure. And to that point, there have been a lot of people who've pointed out the fact that he is one of only 2 or 3 dudes. It is a very unusual place for a man who is, who's got a reputation at this point. Colleagues at the University of Washington State, they said, he was quite misogynistic towards his female students, that he graded them lower, that he was tougher on them, and that he was just, altogether slightly rude to them. So this is very uncomfortable, seeing this.
Women.
It is. It definitely is uncomfortable. And it's interesting, Ashley, as just this week, his legal team has filed documents to have cameras out of the courtroom in this trial. One of the reasons they're citing is that when we see things about him, we dissect his body language. And they're right. I could not help but dissect the body language of the woman sitting next to him, who is very clearly leaning away from him in this photo. You can read into that as much as you want, but it did strike me as being a little odd considering everything we know about how he interacts with women. We, of course, have that story from the brewery owner in Pennsylvania who had claimed that they had to have a conversation with Brian because he was being a little creepy and aggressive toward female staffers and bar patrons.
Probably
there was the
them
girl
if they
who
would
said
be
she
his
had a date with him some 7 years ago and said that it was so uncomfortable and awkward, not aggressive, but just so uncomfortable that she fake vomited in order to end the date early. So there haven't been any real positive stories about him and other females that have come out. So to see him sitting front and center with a group of presumably feminist supporters of Margaret Atwood, a feminist writer, is there's a bit of a disconnect there.
Can we put that picture up again just for a moment? Because, Caitlin just mentioned that the body language of the person sitting beside him. You're right. She does look like she's leaning away from him. That is interesting. I hadn't noticed that until you mentioned it.
And Ashley, and if you look on the other side, everyone's kind of leaning inward towards Margaret Atwood and towards where the photographer is sitting, and that woman is leaning away. It could mean nothing. Really nothing.
You're right. You're right. It could mean nothing, but it's a great observation, and that's why you're a great reporter. Caitlin Becker, thanks for doing this tonight.
That's why.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find Newsnation.
Thank you for telling us about people leaning in. It's about all I got for you, folks. It's about all the energy old Hot Ham has in her right now. But leave me a voicemail. You know, tell me what you think about the weird article that I just read. Go back and listen to it, because it's wild, but it's like, I just don't understand. The Nissan thing really just threw me. And they didn't even say a white Nissan. They just said in 2019 to 2023 Nissan Sentra. Like, what? I gotta re-listen to it or reread it or something. But thank you, my lovely hamsters, for joining me. And I'm sure I'll have more to rant about in the very near future.